I write this in crimson, though I no longer remember if the ink came from a bottle or from beneath my fingernails. The distinction ceased to matter 347 days ago, when the bleeding started. Not my bleeding, not at first, but the bleeding of the shrine itself, the great cathedral of the Emperor's mercy that had stood on this world for 6,000 years without blemish, without stain, without question. I was Father Matthias then, third deacon of the morning prayers, keeper of the reliquary of Saint Cassia's finger bone, a man of modest station and immodest faith. I believed the Emperor's light could burn away any darkness. I was wrong about many things. The first drop appeared on the statue of the Emperor Ascendant, right above his left eye, during the third dawn prayer of Secundus. I noticed it because I always arrived early, before the other priests, before the pilgrims, when the vast cathedral hall still held the previous night's cold. The gas lamps flickered in their iron sconces, casting shadows that danced like supplicants, and my footsteps echoed against the stone floor worn smooth by millions of faithful feet. The Emperor's statue dominated the eastern transept, 40 meters of carved white marble depicting him in the moment of divine transcendence, one hand raised in blessing, the other clutching the sword of righteous fury. I had cleaned that statue myself countless times, knew every curve and edge, every deliberate imperfection the sculptor had left to remind us that perfection belongs only to the divine. The droplet glistened in the lamplight, dark red, fresh. I assumed a bird had somehow entered the cathedral, perhaps injured itself on the stained glass windows that rose in Gothic arches toward the vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of the Emperor's great victories. I climbed the maintenance ladder, my joints protested. I was 53 years old, and my knees remembered every step of the 10,000 prayers I had walked and reached toward his marble cheek with my cleaning cloth. The droplet was warm, blood temperature. I touched it, and it smeared across my fingertip with a consistency I knew too well from the flagellation ceremonies we performed during the Week of Atonement. I froze on that ladder, one hand gripping the cold rung, the other extended toward the Emperor's face, my finger stained red. The cathedral was silent, except for the distant hiss of steam pipes heating the outer chambers. I told myself I was imagining things. Age and poor sleep, I had been having nightmares. Dreams of endless corridors dripping with moisture that might have been condensation or might have been something else. I wiped the statue clean, descended, disposed of the cloth in the reliquary's cleansing brazier where we burned anything that touched the sacred objects, and completed my preparation for morning prayer. I did not report the incident. This was my first mistake, though I did not understand it as a mistake until much later, when the concept of mistakes had become quaint and irrelevant. The second drop appeared the next morning in the exact same location. This time I was not alone. Sister Helen, the cathedral's eldest keeper of the Candle Way, had also arrived early, as was her custom. She was 81 years old, her body bent by decades of service, her hands scarred from candle wax and prayer rope burns. She saw it before I did, standing at the base of the statue with her bucket of cleaning water and her bundle of sacred purification cloths. When I approached, she was staring upward, her cataract-clouded eyes fixed on the Emperor's face. "Father Matthias," she said, her voice the texture of ancient parchment, "the Emperor weeps for us." I looked up. The droplet hung there, impossibly, defying gravity, swelling like a tiny incarnadine fruit. As we watched, it detached and fell, and Sister Helene held out her weathered palm to catch it. The blood struck her skin with a sound like a small stone hitting water. She gasped, not in pain, but in something approaching ecstasy. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. "His sorrow for our sins?" I did not feel sorrow. I felt cold spreading from my spine outward. The kind of cold that comes not from temperature but from wrongness, from the recognition that the world has tilted in a direction it should not tilt. I gently took Sister Helen's hand, examined the blood in her palm. It was darker than the previous day's droplet, almost brown at the edges, as if it had been exposed to air for hours despite falling only seconds ago. "We must inform the bishop," I said. "No." Her grip tightened on my wrist with surprising strength. "This is a miracle, Father. The Emperor shows us his stigmata, his suffering for humanity. We must not disturb this gift with bureaucracy and investigation." I opened my mouth to argue, but she was already walking away toward the candleway, her bucket clanking, the blood still visible as a dark smear on her palm. I watched her go, and I did not follow. I did not report to the bishop. This was my second mistake. By the end of that week, 7 statues were bleeding. All depicted the Emperor in various aspects: Emperor triumphant, Emperor merciful, Emperor wrathful, always from the eyes, or from the palms where nails might have pierced, or from the side where ancient texts spoke of a spear wound dealt by a traitorous son. The other priests began to notice. Some, like Sister Helene, saw divine miracle. Others, like Father Constantine, the cathedral's master of records, approached the phenomenon with scholarly suspicion. He collected samples in sanctified vials, subjected them to prayers of detection, consulted forbidden texts in the deep archives where we kept the treatises on identifying corruption. I assisted him in secret after the evening prayers, when the cathedral closed to pilgrims and the other priests retired to their cells. We worked by lamplight in his study, a cramped room buried 3 levels below the main cathedral, surrounded by shelves of leather-bound volumes whose spines bore titles in languages I did not fully understand. The blood samples sat in their vials arranged on his desk, glowing slightly in the lamplight as if they contained their own luminescence. "It is not paint," Father Constantine said, adjusting his spectacles with ink-stained fingers. "Not dye, not any form of theatrical trickery. The substance is human blood, or something very close to it. But observe." He held up one of the vials. The blood inside moved, swirling in patterns that suggested conscious motion rather than random diffusion. I watched shapes form and dissolve in the liquid. Were those symbols? Words in a language my mind refused to grasp? Letters that hurt to look at directly? "What does it mean?" I asked, though I already suspected I did not want the answer. Father Constantine set down the vial with trembling hands. He was 30 years my junior, brilliant, trained at the Scholars on the cardinal world of Ophelia VII. He had seen things in books that priests like me, born to service in local shrines, never glimpsed. His face had gone pale, a sheen of sweat visible on his forehead despite the chamber's cold. "I do not know, Father Matthias, but I know what it does not mean. It does not mean miracle. It does not mean the Emperor's blessing. There are precedents, cases documented in the forbidden annals. Manifestations of this sort typically precede." He stopped, shook his head. "We must inform the bishop immediately, tonight. If this is what I fear, delay could be catastrophic." We climbed the stone stairs from his study toward the bishop's chambers in the cathedral's western tower. The hallways were dark except for the eternal flames burning in alcoves dedicated to the martyrs, small islands of light in an ocean of shadow. Our footsteps echoed differently than they had before, or perhaps I was simply listening more carefully, hearing the cathedral as a living thing, its stones and spaces forming a body that breathed and perspired and bled. I had never noticed how many of the carved faces on the walls seemed to follow our movement with their stone eyes. I had never registered how the shadows between the arches resembled grasping fingers. We reached the bishop's door, massive oak reinforced with iron, inscribed with prayers of warding. Father Constantine knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. The door swung inward slightly, already ajar. We exchanged glances. The bishop never left his door unlocked, never failed to respond to summons. Father Constantine pushed the door fully open. The bishop's chambers were opulent by our standards, though modest compared to cardinal world extravagance. Tapestries depicting the emperor's ascension covered the walls. A massive desk of imported wood dominated the room, covered in vellum scrolls and wax seals. The bishop's high-backed chair faced the window overlooking the cathedral gardens. Moonlight streamed through the leaded glass, painting geometric patterns across the floor. Bishop Carvey sat in his chair, facing that window, utterly still. "Your Eminence." Father Constantine's voice was steady, but I heard the strain beneath it. No response. We approached slowly. I could see the bishop's profile now, his aquiline nose and strong jaw silhouetted against the moonlight. His hands rested on the chair's arms, fingers curved naturally, relaxed. Everything appeared normal except for his absolute immobility, the absence of breathing, the terrible stillness that separates the living from the dead. Father Constantine reached the chair first, circled around to face the bishop. He made a sound not quite a scream, more like air escaping a punctured bellows. I forced myself to look. Bishop Carvey's eyes were gone. Not merely closed, not damaged, gone. The sockets empty pits that led back into darkness. Blood had run from those sockets like tears, coating his face in intricate patterns that resembled the branching of winter trees or the tributaries of rivers seen from great height. His mouth hung open slightly, and more blood stained his teeth and tongue. But most disturbing was his expression. Despite the horror inflicted on him, his face wore a look of profound serenity, almost peace, as if whatever had taken his eyes had also taken his capacity for suffering. On his desk, written in blood, his blood, I assumed were words in High Gothic. "The skull throne hungers. The blood god sees." I recognized those phrases. Every priest did, from our earliest training in identifying heresy. They were chaos cant, the proclamations of the ruinous powers, specifically of the entity known by many names, all forbidden to speak aloud. The god of rage and slaughter, the thing that wore blood as a crown and skulls as a mantle. Father Constantine grabbed my arm, his grip painful. "We must leave," he said. "Now. We must seal the cathedral and call for the door slammed shut behind us. We spun. No one stood there. The door had closed by itself, or by something invisible, or by the cathedral's own volition. Father Constantine ran to it, pulled at the handle. It would not budge. He threw his shoulder against the wood. Once, twice. Nothing. The door was not locked. It was simply no longer willing to open. A sound reached us from elsewhere in the cathedral, distant at first, then growing closer. Footsteps, many footsteps, and singing. The evening prayer hymn, but wrong. The melody distorted, the words slurred. I recognized Sister Helene's voice leading the chorus, and Father Galen's baritone, and Sister Marcia's soprano. All the priests and acolytes who had called the statue bleeding a miracle, all those who had touched the blood, who had proclaimed it sacred. They were coming up the tower stairs, toward us, singing their corrupted hymn. Father Constantine pulled a vial from his robe, one of the blood samples. He uncorked it, poured the contents onto the door's lock mechanism while speaking words of consecration, of banishment. I did not know what ritual he was attempting, but desperation lends its own wisdom. The blood hissed when it touched the metal, evaporated into crimson steam. The door shuddered. For a moment, I thought it would open. Then the singing stopped. Silence filled the tower, thick as wool, heavy as stone. Father Constantine's breathing was ragged. My own heart pounded so loudly I feared it might give away our position, though surely whatever waited on the other side of that door already knew exactly where we were. A scratching sound began, something dragging across wood, slowly, deliberately, a fingernail, perhaps, or a blade. Carving. I could visualize it perfectly. Someone on the other side of the door, crouched or standing, carefully scratching symbols into the ancient oak. The sound continued for long minutes. Neither of us moved. I prayed silently, words I had spoken 10,000 times, but which now felt hollow, inadequate. The Emperor protects, the Emperor protects, the Emperor protects, but did he? Had he protected Bishop Carvey? Had he protected this cathedral, this world? The scratching stopped. Footsteps retreated down the stairs. The singing resumed, farther away now, moving back toward the cathedral's main hall. We waited until the sound faded completely. Father Constantine approached the door, examined it in the moonlight. The scratching had carved a symbol into the wood, 8-pointed, jagged, radiating malice even in simple lines. I did not need his scholarly knowledge to recognize a chaos star. The window, I said. We climbed down. The bishop's chambers included a small balcony overlooking the gardens, 3 stories up, but there were handholds in the Gothic architecture, gargoyles, and relief carvings and decorative buttresses. We could reach the ground, flee the cathedral, reach the planetary governor's fortress in the city below, call for help. This was the plan I constructed in my mind during the seconds it took to cross the room. Father Constantine nodded. We stepped onto the balcony. The night air was warm, unseasonably so for this time of year. The gardens below looked wrong in the moonlight. The carefully tended paths seemed to writhe. The topiaries shaped like saints appeared to gesticulate. The reflecting pools glimmered with too much color, as if filled with something other than water. But we had no choice. I climbed over the balcony railing first, found a gargoyle's wing with my foot, gripped a protruding stone with my hands. I had not climbed anything since childhood, and my body protested immediately. My fingers ached, my legs trembled. But fear is a remarkable motivator. I descended one handhold at a time, focused entirely on the next grip, the next foothold, refusing to look down or up or to think about what might be waiting at either destination. I was halfway down when I heard Father Constantine scream. I looked up. He stood on the balcony still, both hands clutching the railing, his body rigid. Something had emerged from the bishop's chambers behind him. Sister Helene. I recognized her bent frame, her ceremonial robes, but she moved wrongly, her joints bending in directions joints should not bend, and her face, O merciful Emperor, her face was no longer entirely human. Her skin had split vertically from forehead to chin, and through that split I glimpsed not bone and sinew but something that pulsed and gleamed and reflected the moonlight in shades of brass. She touched Father Constantine's shoulder, just a gentle touch, almost maternal. He stopped screaming. His body relaxed. He turned to face her, and I saw his expression change from terror to confusion to something approaching gratitude. "Father Constantine," I shouted. "Fight it! Resist!" He looked down at me. His eyes had already begun to change color, the whites going red, the irises darkening to copper. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that had not existed before, as if multiple throats spoke in unison. "Why would I resist?" he asked. "The pain is gone, Matthias. All the doubt, all the fear, all the weakness. Only strength remains, only rage, only blood. Join us." He climbed over the railing with inhuman grace, and began descending toward me, moving 3 times faster than I had moved, his hands finding holds that should not have supported weight, his body defying natural law. I did the only thing I could. I let go. The fall was not far, perhaps 4 meters, but I landed poorly on a stone path, felt something crack in my left ankle. Pain shot up my leg, bright and immediate and purifying. I rolled, forced myself upright, limped toward the garden's far wall. Behind me, Father Constantine landed where I had landed, but he absorbed the impact with bent knees and straightened immediately, unharmed. "Run if you wish," he called after me. "Run far and fast. But the blood god sees all wounds. Every cut, every abrasion, every drop spilled calls to him. And you are bleeding now, Father Matthias. Inside, where it counts. Bleeding faith, bleeding certainty, bleeding hope." I ran, or tried to run. My broken ankle made it more of a desperate hobble sprint. The garden wall was high, topped with iron spikes meant to deter thieves, but there was a gate that led to the street beyond. I could see it ahead, illuminated by a street lamp burning promethium with a yellow flame. The gate was closed but not locked. I reached it, grabbed the handle, pulled. The gate opened onto darkness. Not the darkness of night, but absolute darkness, the darkness of voids and forgotten places. I hesitated. Father Constantine's footsteps approached behind me, unhurried, confident. I had no choice. I stepped through. The transition was immediate and disorienting. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in an instant. The sounds of the city always present, even at night. The distant hum of machinery and traffic vanished. I found myself standing in a corridor of stone, narrow and low-ceilinged, lit by torches that burned with red flame. The air stank of copper and myrrh. I turned to look back at the gate, but it was gone. Only blank wall remained, solid and unbroken. I had walked through a gate in the cathedral garden and emerged somewhere else entirely, somewhere impossible. Her voice echoed down the corridor, though I saw no speaker. Deep, resonant, each word striking like a hammer on brass. "Welcome, priest. You have been chosen. The god of blood and skulls has gazed upon you and found you. Interesting." I pressed my back against the stone wall, my breath coming in short gasps. The pain in my ankle had become a distant thing, less important than the terror flooding my veins. "I serve the Emperor," I said, forcing the words out. "I am his servant, his abandoned," the voice interrupted, "his forgotten, his sacrificed. The Emperor sits on his golden throne and does not hear your prayers, but Khorne hears. Khorne always hears. Every cry of rage, every scream of pain, every oath of vengeance. He offers what your corpse god cannot strength, purpose, freedom from doubt." I stumbled forward down the corridor, because standing still meant accepting the voice's words, and I could not accept them, not yet, not ever. My ankle screamed with each step, and I left bloody footprints on the stone floor. Yes, blood had soaked through my shoe. My broken bone had probably torn something important. The corridor branched and branched again. I chose directions at random, driven by instinct to flee rather than any real plan. The torches created shadows that seemed to move independently of their light source. I saw faces in those shadows, or thought I did, warriors with blood-slicked armor, creatures with too many limbs and too many teeth, skulls piled high as mountains. Visions, I told myself. Hallucinations brought on by stress and pain and blood loss. But they felt real. They felt more real than the stone beneath my feet. I emerged into a chamber, circular, vast, the ceiling lost in darkness above. 8 passageways branched off like spokes from a wheel, each marked with a different symbol carved in brass set into the floor. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal of black stone, and on that pedestal rested a skull. Human, I thought, though larger than any human skull should be, and the bone had a quality that suggested it might be metal rather than calcium, brass rather than marrow. I knew I should flee, choose another corridor and keep running. But something drew me toward that pedestal. Compulsion? Curiosity? Or simply the exhaustion of fear? The need to confront whatever was happening rather than fleeing endlessly from it. I approached on my broken ankle, leaning against the chamber wall for support, leaving more blood behind me. The skull watched my progress with empty sockets that somehow conveyed more awareness than any living eye. When I stood before the pedestal, the skull spoke, not with a voice that traveled through air, but with words that manifested directly inside my mind, each one accompanied by a spike of pain behind my eyes. You have questions, priest. Ask them. What is this place? My voice sounded small in the vast chamber, a child's whisper in a giant's hall. A threshold, a doorway, a test. Call it what you will. Why am I here? What do you want from me? Nothing. Everything. Khorne demands only blood. Your blood, another's blood, all blood. But he offers gifts to those who serve. Strength beyond mortal limits, freedom from weakness, victory over all enemies. I will never serve the ruinous powers. I said it with more conviction than I felt. I am the Emperor's servant unto death. The skull laughed, and the sound was thunder and grinding metal, and a million dying screams compressed into a single note. Death? Yes, death surrounds you. Your cathedral is lost, priest. Your fellow worshippers have already chosen their new god. The transformation spreads through your shrine world like a plague, carried on every drop of sacred blood. By dawn, this world will be wholly Khorne's. By next week, the entire sector may fall, and you stand here, broken and bleeding, clinging to faith in an emperor who cannot save you. Then why not kill me? Why this conversation? Because Khorne sees something in you, a rage, a fury. You hide it beneath prayers and pieties, but it burns nonetheless. Rage at your own weakness. Rage at a universe that makes no sense. Rage at a God who demands everything and gives nothing. That rage could be forged into a weapon that would make planets tremble, or it could be wasted, and you could die here, forgotten, one more skull among trillions. Choose. I closed my eyes. The pain in my ankle had spread upward, consuming my leg in waves of agony. I was lightheaded from blood loss. My stomach was empty. I had not eaten since breakfast, had not drunk anything since afternoon. I was in no condition to resist anything, let alone a force that had corrupted an entire cathedral in days. The skull was right. I was weak, powerless, abandoned, and yes, beneath it all, I found rage. Not at chaos, not at Khorne, but at the Emperor himself. What kind of God allows such corruption? What kind of Savior permits his faithful to fall? We pray, we sacrifice, we suffer, we die in his name, and for what? Silence, distance, indifference. The skull was right about that too. But there was something else beneath the rage, something smaller, quieter, but more durable. I had spent my entire life in service, 53 years of morning prayers and evening hymns, of tending the faithful, of offering comfort to the dying and hope to the despairing. In those decades, I had witnessed moments of genuine grace, a widow finding peace after her husband's death, a child's face lighting with wonder at the stained glass windows, fellow priests supporting each other through doubt and darkness, small mercies, tiny lights. They meant something. They had to mean something, because if they did not, if all of that devotion was merely delusion, then existence itself was purposeless, and I might as well accept the skull's offer. But I had seen too much goodness, too much courage, too much love, expressed through faith, to dismiss it all as illusion. The Emperor might be distant, might be dying, might be nothing more than the rotting corpse of a failed tyrant. But the faith his servants carried was real. The good they did in his name was real. I opened my eyes. No. The skull was silent for a long moment. Then, explain. You offer strength, but it is the strength of the animal, not the human. You offer freedom, but it is the freedom of the slave who has forgotten what chains feel like. You offer victory, but only over enemies you yourself create. I have lived 53 years in service to something greater than myself, and that service has given my life meaning. Your God offers only an eternal present of rage and slaughter, world without end. That is not life. That is hell. Pretty words, priest, but words change nothing. Your cathedral is lost. Your world is lost. You are lost. Perhaps. But I will be lost on my terms, not yours. I turned away from the pedestal. My ankle nearly gave out, but I caught myself against the wall. I chose one of the 8 passages at random and began limping down it. Behind me, the skull laughed again, but the laughter carried something new, not mockery, but something closer to respect. Run, little priest, run and bleed. But know this, Khorne does not forget those who interest him, and your blood has already been marked. You may deny him once, twice, 1,000 times, but every wound you take, every pain you endure, every moment of fury you experience, you feed him. You are his, whether you accept it or not. The only question is whether you will acknowledge the truth before you die, or die in ignorance. The passage behind me collapsed with a sound like grinding teeth, cutting off the skull's voice and any possibility of return. I continued forward into darkness, using the rough stone wall as a guide. No torches lit this passage. The only light came from behind me, fading with each step, until I walked in absolute black. I counted my steps. 100, 200, 500. The passage seemed endless. At 1,000 steps, I felt cold air on my face. Fresh air, real air. A breeze carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers and distant rain. I quickened my pace, despite the pain, hope warring with exhaustion. The darkness ahead lightened incrementally, grey replacing black, then charcoal, then something approaching twilight. I saw the passage's end, not a door or gate, but a simple opening, ragged and natural. I stumbled through and found myself on a hillside overlooking my city. The cathedral rose in the distance, its spires silhouetted against the dawn sky. But the sky was wrong. Red clouds roiled above the shrine, and lightning of crimson hue struck the towers repeatedly, though I heard no thunder. The city below showed signs of chaos, fires burning in several districts, smoke rising, the orderly streetlights flickering and failing. How long had I been in that place? Hours, days. My ankle gave out entirely. I collapsed onto the hillside grass, panting, shaking, my body finally acknowledging its limits. I needed to reach help, to warn the planetary governor, to call for aid from off-world. But I could barely move. My vision swam. Blood loss and shock were claiming their due. I must have lost consciousness, because the next thing I remember is sunlight on my face and hands gripping my shoulders, shaking me gently. I opened my eyes to see Sister Agatha, one of the cathedral's mendicants who worked in the city's charity hospitals. Her face was haggard with exhaustion, her robes stained with blood and worse things, but her eyes were clear and human and afraid. "Father Matthias." "Oh, thank the Emperor, you're alive. Can you walk?" "We need to move." "The cathedral," I said, my voice a croak. "It's fallen. Chaos. Corruption. I know. The whole city knows now." Some got out before the transformation was complete. "We've been gathering survivors at the governor's fortress. It's not safe, but it's defendable. Can you stand?" With her help, I managed to get upright, though I could not put any weight on my left leg. She was stronger than she looked, supporting most of my weight as we descended the hillside toward one of the city's arterial roads. Other survivors joined us as we moved, citizens in torn clothing, injured guards, a few priests from outlying shrines. No one spoke much. We were all trying to process what was happening, how our world had transformed overnight from a peaceful shrine world to a war zone. The governor's fortress was a pre-imperial structure, built during the Age of Strife, when this world had been contested by petty warlords. Massive walls of reinforced stone, weapon emplacements, its own water supply and food stores. It had been a museum and administrative center for centuries. Now it was a refugee camp and defensive position. Guards in flak armor manned the walls, their lasguns charged and ready. Someone had dragged anti-air weapons from storage and mounted them on the towers. They let us through the gates after Sister Agatha identified herself and vouched for me. Inside the courtyard, hundreds of people huddled in small groups, families, workers, soldiers. All of them wore the same expression. Shock giving way to terror, giving way to grim determination. I had seen that progression before, during the Orc raid 30 years ago, when I was a young acolyte. But this was different. Orcs were a known threat, a physical enemy to be fought and killed. Chaos was infection, corruption from within. How do you fight an enemy that turns your allies against you? Sister Agatha brought me to the fortress's Medicae station, where field surgeons were treating the wounded with limited supplies. A harried-looking man with blood-soaked apron set my ankle. The bone had fractured cleanly, treatable with splinting and prayers to the Emperor's healing. He gave me a crutch fashioned from a broken banner pole and advised me to stay off the leg for a week. I thanked him and moved on, because others needed his attention more than I did. I found Governor Markham in the command center, a room once used for historical lectures, but now filled with Vox equipment and tactical displays. He was 60 years old, white-haired, a career bureaucrat who had never expected to face actual warfare. But he was holding together, issuing orders with only the slightest tremor in his voice. When he saw me, he gestured me over. "Father Matthias, thank the Emperor you made it out. We need every person of faith we can get. The corruption is spreading faster than we anticipated. 3 more districts fell during the night. Anyone who touches the corrupted blood transforms within hours. We're burning bodies in the streets just to prevent the spread, but it's not enough. What about calling for help? The Imperium must be notified. We've been broadcasting on all frequencies since this started. No response yet. The nearest Imperial Navy base is 3 weeks away at best speed. The nearest Guard regiment is 2 months. We might hold out for a week if we're lucky. After that..." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. "Then we make them pay for every hour," I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. The rage the skull had identified, the fury I had denied it was still there, but now I directed it toward a different purpose, not toward chaos, but toward protecting what remained of my world. Governor Markham nodded, seeing something in my face that seemed to reassure him. "Can you help organize the survivors? Many are losing faith, Father. They're saying the Emperor has abandoned us, that we should surrender or flee. We need someone who can remind them what we're fighting for. I spent the next hours moving through the fortress, speaking to the refugees, leading prayers, offering what comfort I could. Many recognized me from the cathedral, had seen me conduct services or heard my sermons. My presence seemed to steady them, though I felt anything but steady myself. The skull's words echoed in my mind constantly. You are his, whether you accept it or not. On the second day, the corrupted forces attacked the fortress directly. I watched from the walls as they came, and I barely recognized them as human. Some still wore the robes of my fellow priests, but their bodies had been reshaped by dark powers, limbs elongated, skin turned brass or crimson, faces restructured into masks of rage. They carried crude weapons, blades and axes dripping with blood that seemed to move with its own volition. Sister Helene was among them, still recognizable by her bent frame despite everything else that had changed. She saw me watching and raised one twisted hand in a gesture that might have been a wave or a threat. The guards opened fire. Lasgun beams cut through the attackers, dropping several. But the corrupted kept coming, feeling no pain, showing no fear. They reached the walls and began climbing, their transformed bodies giving them inhuman agility. Hand to hand, fighting erupted along the battlements. I grabbed a fallen lasgun from a dead guard and fired into the mass below, not bothering to aim, just adding my small contribution to the defensive fire. The weapon's recoil jarred my shoulders, but the familiar weight felt right in my hands, purposeful. The first attack was repelled after an hour of fighting. 15 guards dead, twice that number wounded. We counted 37 corrupted bodies below the walls, but I knew there would be more tomorrow, and more the day after. A tide that could not be stopped, only delayed. That night, I prayed alone in one of the fortress's old chapels, a small room with a faded fresco of the Emperor on the wall. My words felt hollow, rote, like I was speaking to empty air. But I continued anyway, because the alternative was silence, and silence meant giving up. I was finishing the evening catechism when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Father Constantine. He stood in the chapel doorway, and for a moment my heart leapt. He had escaped. He had resisted the corruption. We were not alone. Then I saw his eyes, red where they should be white, brass where they should be colored. He smiled, and his teeth were iron. Still praying, Matthias? Still speaking to silence? I stood, using my crutch for support, and placed myself between him and the chapel's altar. A futile gesture, but a necessary one. You're not welcome here, Constantine. Whatever you were, you're something else now. I am what I always should have been. Freed, empowered, at peace with my rage. And I've come to offer you one last chance. Join us. Stop this pointless resistance. The skull throne hungers, yes, but it does not require your skull specifically. You could live. You could thrive. You could have purpose. I have purpose. Protecting corpses? Defending the ruins of a faith that never saved anyone? Look at yourself, Matthias. Broken, exhausted, praying to a God who does not answer. When has the Emperor ever answered? When has he ever intervened? He sits on his throne and bleeds humanity dry, demanding everything and giving nothing. Khorne at least is honest. He takes blood, yes, but he gives strength. He gives victory. He gives meaning to suffering. I looked at what remained of Father Constantine, at the brilliant scholar I had known transformed into a thing of brass and bloodlust, and I felt not rage but sorrow. You call this strength? You call this freedom? You're a puppet, Constantine, a tool. Whatever whispered to you in that tower, whatever promised you power, it lied. You've traded one master for another, except your new master offers only an eternity of violence. He stepped further into the chapel, and I saw the walls begin to sweat blood where his shadow touched them. You speak of trading masters as if you have a choice. You don't. None of us do. The only choice is whether to suffer in service or revel in it. I chose revelry. Then you've already lost. Because suffering with purpose is victory, Constantine. Even if we all die here, even if this fortress falls and this world burns, we will have stood against the darkness. That matters. It has to matter. Because if it doesn't, if resistance is meaningless, then the universe itself is meaningless, and I refuse to believe that. Constantine lunged, faster than any human should move. But he hesitated. Some fragment of his former self remained, enough to make him pause for half a second before striking down someone he had once called friend. That hesitation saved my life. I swung my crutch like a club, catching him across the temple. The blessed wood cracked against his altered skull, and he staggered. Not hurt, I doubted I could hurt him now, but surprised. I turned and ran, hobbled, really toward the chapel's back exit. Behind me, Constantine roared, a sound that mixed human frustration with something far less human. I heard him give chase, but I had a few seconds lead. I emerged into a hallway, shouted for guards. 2 soldiers appeared from a side corridor, saw Constantine emerging from the chapel, and opened fire without hesitation. Lasgun beams struck Constantine repeatedly. Holes appeared in his chest, his arms, his legs, but he kept coming, wounds sealing themselves almost immediately, cauterized by the same powers that had remade him. The guards fell back, firing continuously. More soldiers arrived. Someone produced a meltergun, a rare weapon, usually reserved for tank combat, and fired. The beam of superheated air struck Constantine full in the torso, and for a moment his body glowed white-hot. He screamed, and the scream contained pain. Real pain. Whatever he had become, he was not invulnerable. But he did not die. He retreated instead, moving with that same inhuman speed, back through the chapel and presumably out whatever entrance he had used to infiltrate the fortress. The soldiers pursued but found no trace. He had simply vanished. Governor Markham doubled the guard after that incident. No more solo prayers, no more unwatched corridors. The fortress became a prison as much as a refuge, everyone suspicious of everyone else, because if Constantine could be corrupted, anyone could be. Trust eroded, fights broke out over food, over water, over accusations of heresy. I spent my time trying to mediate, to maintain order, but I was only one man with a broken ankle and dwindling authority. On the 5th day, a ship arrived in orbit. We saw it descend through the crimson-stained atmosphere, a vessel bearing the seal of the Inquisition. My heart, which had become accustomed to despair, dared to rise. The Inquisition, the Emperor's most zealous servants, if anyone could purge this corruption, it was they. The ship landed outside the fortress, and a single figure emerged. She was tall, armored in power armor of black and silver, carrying a force sword that hummed with barely contained power. Her face was hidden behind a skull-faced helmet. She approached the fortress gates alone, and the guards, after voxing for permission, opened them. I was summoned to meet her along with Governor Markham. We found her in the courtyard, surrounded by nervous soldiers, her presence seeming to darken the very air around her. When she removed her helmet, I saw a woman of indeterminate age. She might have been 30 or 300, her face bearing scars and augmetics that suggested extensive combat experience. Her eyes were grey and cold and absolutely certain. "I am Inquisitor Valdane," she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. I received your distress signals. Tell me everything. We did. Governor Markham provided the military details, numbers, locations, defensive capabilities. I provided the religious context, the bleeding statues, the corruption's spread, Father Constantine's transformation. She listened without interruption, her expression never changing. When we finished, she was silent for a long moment. "This world is lost," she said finally. "The corruption has progressed too far. In 3 days, maybe 4, the entire population will be converted or dead. I estimate the chaos forces already number in the tens of thousands. By next week, they will be able to threaten neighboring systems. This cannot be allowed." "What are you saying?" Governor Markham asked, though I could see he already understood. "Exterminatus. Total planetary sterilization. I will call in the Navy, and they will purge this world from orbit. Atmospheric incineration or cyclonic torpedoes, I have not yet decided. Everyone and everything will die, but the corruption will be contained." The fortress courtyard, which had been filled with the murmur of hundreds of conversations, went absolutely silent. Everyone had heard. Everyone understood. Inquisitor Voldane had just sentenced our world to death. "How many people are still uncorrupted?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Unknown. Perhaps 50,000 scattered across the planet. Perhaps fewer. It does not matter. Their lives are forfeit. You can't just, there has to be another way. Evacuation. Your ship." "My ship can carry 300 at maximum capacity. I am taking critical personnel, the governor, key military staff, anyone with strategic intelligence. The rest stay. The rest die. It is the only way to ensure the corruption does not spread." I looked at Governor Markham, expecting protest, expecting him to reject this horror. But he was nodding slowly, accepting the Inquisitor's logic, because it was logical in the cold calculus of the Imperium. Sacrifice one world to save a sector. Sacrifice 50,000 to save billions. The mathematics of survival. "When?" he asked. "The Navy arrives in 18 hours. Bombardment begins immediately after. You have until then to select who will be saved. Choose wisely." She replaced her helmet and walked back toward her ship, leaving us to stare at each other in numb horror. Around the courtyard, people began to understand what was coming. Some cried, some prayed, some simply sat down where they stood, overwhelmed. I stood leaning on my crutch, feeling the weight of 53 years of faith collapsing onto my shoulders. This was the Emperor's mercy. This was divine providence. Total annihilation of the faithful along with the damned, because the faithful were simply in the way. The skull had been right about one thing: the Emperor demanded everything and gave nothing, not even the dignity of choosing how to die. I limped away from the governor's office, ignoring calls to return, ignoring Sister Agatha's concerned questions. I made my way to the fortress walls and climbed to the battlements despite my ankle, because I needed to see the world one last time before it burned. The city spread below me, my city, the place I had lived my entire life. I could see the cathedral in the distance, still standing, still bleeding. I wondered if Father Constantine was there now, if Sister Helene still led her corrupted congregation in worship of their new god. 18 hours. That was all that remained. 18 hours, and then fire from the sky, and then nothing. I do not know how long I stood there, but eventually I became aware of someone standing beside me. Not Sister Agatha or Governor Markham, but an old soldier, one of the fortress guards, a man whose name I had never learned. He was perhaps my age, grizzled and scarred, holding his lasgun with easy familiarity. "Father," he said, "is this really the Emperor's will?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to provide the comfort of certainty, to assure him that divine wisdom guided even this horror. But I could not. The words would not come. Instead, I said, "I don't know. I don't know anything anymore." He nodded as if that answer satisfied him more than any platitude would have. "My wife is out there somewhere, maybe corrupted, maybe dead, maybe hiding. Doesn't matter now, does it? She's gone either way." Funny thing, we argued the morning the bleeding started. Stupid argument about nothing important. I wanted to apologize. Was going to after my shift. But then everything happened so fast. Never got the chance. That's going to be the last memory I have of her. An argument. "I'm sorry." "Yeah, me too." He was silent for a moment then. "What do you think happens after? Is there really an Emperor's light waiting for us? Or is that just a story we tell to make dying easier?" I could have lied. Should have lied. But I was tired of lies. Tired of certainties I did not feel. I think if we've lived with courage, with kindness, with purpose, then we've already found whatever grace exists in this universe. If there's something after, good. If there's not, then at least we lived as well as we could while we had the chance. He considered this, then smiled, a surprisingly peaceful expression on his war-worn face. "That's a better answer than I expected, Father. Thank you." He walked away, leaving me alone on the battlement. I looked up at the sky, at the stars emerging as dusk fell. Somewhere up there, a Navy flotilla was approaching, carrying weapons designed to exterminate entire biospheres. Somewhere up there, billions of humans lived and worked and prayed, completely unaware that one of their sister worlds was about to cease existing. And somewhere up there, perhaps, the Emperor watched from his golden throne, if he watched at all. The skull's voice came back to me, not as external sound but as memory. "You are his, whether you accept it or not. Every wound you take, every pain you endure, every moment of fury you experience, you feed him." Was it true? Was my resistance, my defiance, my rage at injustice, nothing more than fuel for the very force I opposed? Or was the skull simply doing what chaos does best, lying, confusing, turning truth into weapon? I had no answer. I had nothing but questions, and only 18 hours left to contemplate them. I spent those hours in prayer. Not the rote prayers of ceremony, but genuine conversation with whatever might be listening. I prayed for the dead and the corrupted and the soon-to-be dead. I prayed for Governor Markham, who would have to live with the decision to abandon his world. I prayed for Inquisitor Valdane, who carried the terrible burden of such choices. I prayed for Father Constantine, who had been brilliant and curious and kind before the darkness took him. I prayed for Sister Helene, who had seen miracle where she should have seen threat. I prayed for the old soldier and his wife, for their interrupted apology, for all the small griefs that would be erased along with everything else. And yes, I prayed for myself. "Forgive me," I whispered to whoever listened. "Forgive me for doubting. Forgive me for not seeing the corruption sooner. Forgive me for surviving when others died. Forgive me for the rage that burns even now, despite everything. Forgive me for not being strong enough to save anyone." The hours passed. Dawn approached. I watched the eastern horizon begin to lighten, knowing it would be the last dawn this world ever saw. Other people gathered on the walls, not everyone, but enough. Hundreds of survivors standing silently, watching the sky, waiting for the end. No one spoke. What was there to say? At precisely the promised hour, the sky caught fire. The bombardment was beautiful in its horror. Lances of light descended from orbit, striking the planet's surface with precision that spoke of thousands of years of calculated extermination. Each strike created a mushroom cloud of fire and ash, The cathedral was one of the first targets. I watched it vanish in an instant, 6,000 years of history erased in a flash of atomic fire. The city followed, district by district, methodically destroyed. The corrupted forces scattered across the landscape tried to flee, but there was nowhere to flee to. The bombardment was total, absolute, everywhere at once. The fortress was spared, of course. Inquisitor Valdane had provided coordinates to exclude our position. But we felt every strike as tremors through the ground, saw every flash illuminate the smoke-choked sky. The air itself began to heat up, cooked by the firestorm consuming the world around us. People wept, or prayed, or simply watched in silence. I did all three. Somewhere in that inferno, Father Constantine burned. Sister Helene burned. The old soldier's wife burned. Everyone and everything I had ever known burned, and I stood on a battlement and watched it happen, powerless to stop it, powerless to do anything but witness. After 3 hours, the bombardment ceased. The world below was transformed into a wasteland of ash and molten stone. Nothing moved. Nothing lived. The corruption had been purged, along with everything else. Mission accomplished. Threat contained. Another world sacrificed on the altar of survival. Inquisitor Valdane's ship lifted from the fortress landing pad, carrying Governor Markham and 50 other selected survivors. I was not among them. She had decided my knowledge was not strategically valuable, and there was no room for priests. I watched the ship ascend through the ash-choked atmosphere and disappear into the red-black sky. We, who remained perhaps 200, understood what our fate would be. The planet was dead. The life support systems in the fortress might last a week, maybe 2. Then we would suffocate or starve, or be cooked by the residual heat. A slow death rather than the quick mercy of orbital bombardment. We held a service that evening in the fortress chapel, what remained of the faithful gathering to pray one last time. I led the ceremony despite my broken faith, because someone had to, because the familiar words provided structure to horror. We sang the evening hymn, and for a moment I almost felt the Emperor's presence not as divine power or miraculous intervention, but as a shared connection between suffering humans who chose to face death with dignity rather than despair. After the service, people dispersed to spend their remaining time as they wished. Some wrote letters that would never be sent. Some gathered in small groups to tell stories and share food. Some simply slept, exhausted beyond measure. I returned to the battlement, to the same spot where I had watched the world burn, because I wanted to see the stars one more time before the end. I stood there for hours, leaning on my crutch, my broken ankle aching, my body exhausted, my mind empty of everything except a strange, peaceful acceptance. I had done what I could. I had resisted the darkness. I had maintained faith even as faith crumbled around me. If that was not enough, so be it. At least I had tried. A sound behind me. Footsteps. I turned, expecting another survivor seeking companionship or conversation. Instead, I saw him. Father Constantine, burned, his brass skin charred and cracked, but alive. Impossibly alive. Still standing, Matthias? His voice was damaged, rasping. Still defiant? I should have been afraid. Should have called for guards. Should have fled. But I was too tired for fear. How are you alive? The bombardment. Khorne protects his servants. Fire purifies, but it also strengthens. I walked through the flames and emerged. Changed. Again. Stronger. I've come to collect you, old friend. One last chance. The world is dead, but the universe is vast. There are other worlds, other wars, other offerings for the Skull Throne. Join me. Embrace the rage. Stop this futile resistance. I looked at what remained of Father Constantin, at the scholar I had respected transformed into a monster, and I felt not rage but pity. No. Why? What do you have left to fight for? Everyone is dead. Your world is ash. Your faith is proven false. Why continue this meaningless defiance? Because, I said slowly, working out the answer as I spoke, defiance is the only choice that cannot be taken from me. You offer power, but accepting it means surrendering my will. The Emperor may be silent, may be distant, may be nothing more than a corpse on a throne. But serving him, truly serving him, not from fear or expectation of reward, but from choice that is freedom, that is meaning. You will never understand that, Constantine, because you've already surrendered. You've given yourself to a force that uses you as a tool. I remain myself, broken and dying, but myself nonetheless. He studied me for a long moment. Then, shockingly, he laughed, not the brass thunder of his corrupted form, but something closer to his old laugh, wry and slightly sad. You magnificent fool. Khorne was right about you. You are interesting. Most mortals fold eventually, accept the inevitable, but not you, not even at the very end. Very well. Die as you choose, priest. Die in your pointless faith. But know this, your defiance, your rage, your very resistance, it still feeds him. Every act of fury, even fury in the Emperor's name, strengthens the god of blood. You cannot win. You can only choose how you lose. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing on stone, leaving me alone on the battlement once more. I watched him disappear into the darkness beyond the fortress walls, heading toward fort. Another world to corrupt? Another war to fight? It did not matter. He was gone, and I remained. I looked up at the stars, at the vast uncaring universe spread above me, and I prayed one final time, not for salvation or mercy or divine intervention, just a simple acknowledgement of the path I had chosen. I am yours, Emperor, whether you hear me or not. I am yours in defiance of darkness, in rejection of corruption, in acceptance of death. If that is not enough, then nothing ever could be. Let it be sufficient that I tried. The days that followed were a slow descent into the inevitable. The fortress's life support began failing, filters clogged with ash, generators running out of fuel, seals cracking from the heat. People died quietly, without drama, simply stopping one by one like candles being extinguished. I performed last rites for those who wanted them, offered comfort where I could, and waited for my own ending. On the 9th day after the bombardment, I was one of only 12 survivors remaining. My ankle had finally healed enough to walk without the crutch, which struck me as darkly humorous, my body repairing itself even as the world around it died. I spent that day in the chapel, not praying but simply sitting in silence, too tired for words. Sister Agatha found me there as the twilight deepened. She looked skeletal, her skin grey, her eyes sunken. She sat beside me without speaking. We stayed like that for a long time, two exhausted humans sharing the last hours of existence. "Do you still believe, Father?" she asked finally. "I don't know. I believe in something. Maybe not the Emperor as presented by the ecclesiarchy, maybe not the divine tyrant of a million worlds, but I believe in the light we carry inside us, the choice to be kind even when the universe gives no reason for kindness. If that's faith, then yes, I still believe." She smiled. "That's enough, I think. It has to be enough." She died that night, peacefully, in her sleep. I moved her body to the chapel and arranged her hands in the sign of the Aquila. There were no more words to speak, no more ceremonies to perform, I was simply too exhausted. I sat beside her and waited. The last thing I remember clearly is the fortress walls beginning to glow red as the residual heat finally penetrated our refuge. The stone itself was cooking, the air becoming thick and unbreathable. I lay down on the chapel floor, closed my eyes, and prepared for the ending. But the ending did not come. I woke, and I should not have woken. The air was breathable again. The heat had subsided. I sat up, confused, disoriented. The chapel looked different. The walls were no longer stone but something that resembled bone. The ceiling was gone, replaced by a sky of roiling red clouds, and standing in the chapel doorway was the brass skull from the threshold, except now it had a body massive, armored, wielding a sword of black metal that dripped with blood that burned like acid. "No," I said. "I died. I must have died." The skull laughed, and the sound shook the false chapel. "Death? No, little priest, not yet. Not for you. Khorne has decided you are too interesting to simply let fade. You wanted to die with your faith intact? How disappointing. How mortal. Instead, you will live. You will be given a choice, again and again, for as long as it takes for you to understand. The choice between service and suffering, between power and pain, between rage embraced and rage denied. And each time you choose suffering, each time you choose denial, you will feel what that choice costs. The agony, the futility, the meaninglessness, until you break, until you accept, until you join us. The chapel dissolved. I found myself standing in the threshold corridor again, except this time it was endless, stretching in all directions, a maze of brass and bone and blood, and I understood, with sick certainty, that this was my fate. Not death, not release, but eternal recursion, eternal testing, eternal suffering. The skull had not lied. Khorne was patient. He would break me eventually. It was only a question of when. I write this now from somewhere, nowhere, a place between places, a moment stretched into eternity. How long have I been here? Days, years, centuries. Time has no meaning in this place. I have faced the choice again and again, in 1,000 variations, 1,000,000 permutations. Always the same essential question, will you serve? And always the same answer, no, no, I will not. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Each refusal brings pain, sometimes physical, my body torn apart and remade, broken and healed, burned and frozen. Sometimes psychological memories twisted, identities confused, loved ones corrupted before my eyes. Sometimes existential, the certainty that I am already damned, that my resistance is illusion, that I am nothing more than entertainment for a cosmic horror that cares nothing for my determination. But I continue to refuse. Because what else is there? If I accept, I lose everything that makes me myself. If I refuse, I suffer, but I suffer as myself, as Father Matthias, as the man who chose faith even when faith seemed foolish. It is not much, it is perhaps nothing, but it is mine. The skull speaks to me sometimes, during the intervals between tests. It tells me that my world is long gone, that the Imperium has moved on, that everyone I knew is dust. It tells me that my resistance is meaningless, that no one remembers my name, that my sacrifice accomplishes nothing. It may be telling the truth, probably is telling the truth, but truth is not the same as meaning. I choose my meaning. I choose defiance. I do not know if this account will ever be found. If anyone will ever read these words written in crimson in a place that exists outside normal space and time, perhaps this too is merely another test, another layer of the labyrinth. But I write nonetheless, because writing affirms existence, affirms choice, affirms that I was here and I resisted. If you are reading this, whoever you are, know that Father Matthias of the Cathedral of the Emperor's Mercy stood against the darkness. He did not win. He may never win, but he stood. And if you ever face a similar choice, if you ever stand before a brass skull in a corridor of horrors and are offered power in exchange for surrender, remember me. Remember that even the smallest resistance matters. Remember that choosing how you suffer is itself a form of victory. Remember that rage can be holy if it is directed toward the right targets. Remember that faith is not certainty but choice, made again and again despite all evidence, despite all pain, despite all futility. The skull is coming again. I can hear its footsteps echoing down the corridor, brass on bone. Another test, another choice, another refusal. This is my eternity now, my punishment and my purpose. I do not pray for release, because I understand now that release is not coming. I pray only for strength to refuse one more time, and then one more time after that, forever if necessary. The Emperor protects, we used to say, but the Emperor does not protect. Not really. Not in any way that matters to individual suffering humans. What protects is choice. What protects is will. What protects is the determination to remain yourself, even when the universe demands you become something else. I am Father Matthias. I served the Emperor faithfully for 53 years, and I continue to serve him now, in the only way left to me by refusing to serve anything else. If that is not enough, then so be it. But it will have to be enough for me. The footsteps are very close now. The test is beginning again. I straighten my spine, clench my fists, and prepare to say no once more. Always no. Forever no. Until the universe itself burns down, and there is nothing left but the echo of a single word, repeated endlessly. No. 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 This is what happens when Khorne demands your blood. This is what happens when you refuse to give it willingly. This is what happens when faith becomes stubbornness, when devotion becomes defiance, when prayer becomes simple, eternal, magnificent refusal. I am Father Matthias. I am a priest of the God Emperor of mankind. And I do not kneel. Not today. Not ever. No.